Hi, everyone. Welcome. Grab a seat and get comfortable. You have just entered the Smartest Doctor in the Room podcast, where you can get the best information anytime, anywhere. I'm your host, Dr. Dean Mitchell.
Today's podcast will be about eye health. I have on Dr. Rudrani Banik, an amazing ophthalmologist who is a leader in her field and currently organizing this incredible eye health summit this coming week when the podcast is being released. It's going to be on May 1st, and it's going to be available online, so there's no reason you can't sign up. And I think hopefully after this podcast, you're going to want to sign up.
I want to take a moment to thank the sponsors that make this podcast possible.
I know you may already know from listening to my podcast that I specialize in treating patients with toxic mold exposure. It's become a serious problem for many years as we deal with the hurricanes and floods throughout the country. Even simple bathroom water leaks from a toilet in your home over time can contribute to mold buildup. I can help patients that suffer from the symptoms of toxic mold, but I also rely on the patients getting their current residence inspected so they are not continually being exposed. My go-to person for mold exposure is Joe Reese. Joe is a certified mold inspector with decades of experience. He is super thorough and gives you a straightforward assessment and tells you whether it's safe to live in your home or if there is mold. I should know. I used Joe when I moved to my new home 4 years ago. Fortunately, when I moved in, I smelled an unusual odor in my basement, and I immediately called Joe. He came over with his instruments, and he found the problem. Afterwards, I had remediation, and the problem was solved. Joe does inspections all throughout the country. He welcomes calls to his cell phone at 908-451-4592. You can also reach him by email at jprconsultants7929@gmail.com. Remember, mold in your home is not a good thing, but thankfully it's a problem that can be fixed.
If you've been following the podcast, you may know I practice holistic functional medicine and immunology. In fact, at Mitchell Medical Group, we've been treating chronic fatigue patients for 3 decades. It's critical in this work to have a trusted pharmacy that can compound medications for our sensitive patients' needs. ITC Pharmacy has been our go-to pharmacy the entire time. They can make medications ranging from thyroid hormones to dye-free medications for all of our highly sensitive, even allergic patients. If you or your holistic doctor are looking for these very specific patient medications, you can contact ITC at 888-349-5453. They have licenses throughout the country and can have medications delivered right to your doorsteps. My patients have been so pleased with their service, and you will be too.
Dr. Banik is a board-certified ophthalmologist with advanced training in neuro-ophthalmology and functional medicine. That's a little bit of an unusual combination. This is the first time I've encountered a functional ophthalmologist. She is also an associate professor of ophthalmology at Mount Sinai's Icahn School of Medicine here in New York City. And in a very understated way, she's a fellow alumnus of Brown University, where I also went to undergrad, but she also graduated the college and the medical school, which is an amazing program. And those were the students that usually got all the A's in the classes, and I had to scrounge around if there was any left over. She is also the author of the book Beyond Carrots, the best foods for eye health from A to Z. So I'm really excited to introduce Dr. Rudrani Banik to our listeners.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mitchell, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Okay. Now, I always like to start off my own personal curiosity, as a physician, and again, with your background and training, you had probably a lot of choices. Why did you choose ophthalmology as your specialty?
Yeah, so this goes back to undergrad at Brown, and they encouraged us to start looking into some areas of medicine we may want to specialize in. So I started shadowing lots of doctors. So I shadowed a family practice doctor, pediatrician, neonatologist, psychiatrist, dermatologist. And then one of my family friends was doing his ophthalmology residency, and he said, "Hey, why don't you come spend a day with me?" And I said, I don't know about that, but okay. I wasn't so interested in eyes. I was thinking that they were kind of, not something I would be.
Very specialized, small area. We'll get into that, which is, it's interesting, but it is sometimes it's a little confining for, some of the people I've met over the years were very bright and just like a lot of different, that's one of the things about even internal medicine from my background. It was like so many organs that I was dealing with, you know.
Yeah, yeah. So I spent the day with him. I went to the OR with him. I watched him do cataract surgery. I watched him operate on kids, fix strabismus, which is crossed eyes. And I was just hooked. That one day changed my life. And then, pretty much everything I did later on in med school was kind of geared towards applying for ophthalmology. And fortunately, I got in. So that was the start of my journey. And I, love taking care of people's eyes, helping people see better, restore eyesight. It's really, I feel like it's a gift that I'm able to help people in this way.
Yeah, it sounds like you were very directed. Okay, let's move a little bit on to your personal story. Now, I know in reading Beyond Carrots, which is, by the way, it's a beautiful book too. The colors, the pictures, really nice.
Actually, my daughter designed it. She's got an eye for design. Yeah, during COVID.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
it's a fun book to read. Now, but you mentioned in the book, which is always fascinating in these books, that there was sort of a personal medical issue that started to move you in this area of, holistic functional medicine. Would you mind sharing that with the listeners?
Sure. So I developed migraines when I was in my mid-20s, but I would get them once in a blue moon. It didn't really bother me. But then in my 40s, I had a lot going on in my life, a lot of stress. We were renovating an apartment. I was working full time, I had a young kid. And I think the stress got to me and I started to get really bad migraines more often. And then they became daily headaches. And if you've ever had a migraine, it's not fun.
Yeah, I had once or twice and I couldn't get out of the bed and it was god awful.
It was. And imagine having that every single day.
So I can't imagine. Like you mentioned, you worked through that, but I don't know how you did that.
I don't know how I did it either, but somehow I managed. And so I went to, I live in New York City as you know, and I went to some of the top doctors here in New York, migraine doctors, and they just wrote me prescription after prescription after prescription. I tried them, didn't work, and nothing would break my cycle. So finally, after about 3 years of this, I said, you know what? There must be a better way. And I started to do my own research, and I discovered that there were all these other things that were written about, that were published, that none of my doctors ever talked to me about. Now, this is back maybe about 10 years ago that this happened. And I think nowadays, most migraine doctors talk about these strategies, but like supplementation and caffeine and lifestyle, sleep, no one was talking to me about this. So I discovered functional medicine through my migraine journey. I decided to go to the course to help myself. And what ended up happening was I was so amazed by this world of integrative and functional medicine. I said, you know what, this is what I want to do. This is the missing piece of my medical education. So I started to take courses and I got certified. And then I started to use these principles for my migraine patients, but also for my eye patients. And I've really seen some incredible results. Like people have really turned around their health and their vision using integrative and functional strategies.
Very interesting. All right, let's get to Beyond Carrots, because I have a couple of really direct questions for you. So you ready?
Sure, yes.
Before we get into the weeds of some of the the medical terminology, do foods and supplements like carrots, does it really help your eyesight?
Yeah, I get this question all the time because
you do. I was thinking, I said, oh, this is a good one to get her with.
I know that's so common. And, people, there's this myth out there that if you just eat enough carrots, you'll have perfect 20/20 vision.
You'll turn orange. Then I've done that actually.
Yeah, that's a lot of beta carotene, right? But yes, we need beta carotene for our eyes. It helps with night vision. It helps with dry eye, but that's not the only nutrient. So what I try to get across in the book is that don't just rely on carrots for your vision. You need a whole diversity of nutrients because our eyes, as you mentioned earlier, they're small, but they're so complex. And they work in such intricate ways. And we need a good supply of nutrients to support all of their function, all of the functions of all the cells and tissues in the eye. So we need diversity. That's really the key. And I also say this in the book, the diversity should really come from colorful plants, meaning fruits and veggies.
Great example. Okay, I want to get into, because I did find this also fascinating. You mentioned in the book about mitochondria are important for the eye. And it's funny, my listeners know, because I've been doing immunology and functional medicine for over 25 years. And I do see what's called chronic fatigue patients, sometimes fibromyalgia patients. And one of the people that I was mentored by was very big that mitochondrial dysfunction was a big part of that. And I try to explain to the patients, as probably you do also, I say to them, look, think back to 8th grade. Remember you took biology. Mitochondria look like those little cigar-shaped cells, but they're the batteries of the cell. And so obviously for chronic fatigue, I find that, using supplements to help mitochondrial function are really important to hopefully get the muscles going. But I was kind of interested. So mitochondria, there are cells like, I guess they're in the eye as well. Is that what they are? Wow.
Yeah. So I'll share some interesting fun facts
Yeah.
with you and the audience. So the eye is a direct extension of the brain.
Right.
So it's considered part of the central nervous system. And we know that the brain is constantly processing information and it requires a lot of energy. The eye is exactly the same way. And two structures in the eye have a very, very high metabolic rate, perhaps even higher than the brain's metabolic rate.
Wow.
And these structures are the retina and the optic nerve. And the retina, what it does is basically it's a layer in the back of the eye that captures light energy and then processes that light energy to go to the brain for further processing. But when it captures light energy, it actually has to regenerate its cell membranes. And it's constantly turning over its cell membranes. It's constantly producing energy, using energy, and then requiring more and more and more energy. So there are abundant mitochondria in retinal ganglion cells. And then in the optic nerve, also the cable that connects the eye to the brain, that also is chock full of lots of mitochondria. So we know that we need all these nutrients that support mitochondrial health.
Interesting. Wow. Again, that was really eye-opening to me. I also want to ask you about oxidative stress to the eye, because we always hear about antioxidants. Everybody, antioxidants are great for us, And I just read, it was funny because it was in the paper, the New York Times this past week, about how antioxidants are very helpful to the macula. As you know, the most important maybe area on the retina, which helps focus our vision. And it was interesting because in the article, the reason it came up because it was a whole big article about asparagus, that it's very high in lutein, as you know, and zeaxanthin, if I can say that, I can't even say that right.
Yes, it's hard to pronounce.
Tell us about what in your view is the oxidative stress in the eye? Because I want to get into that later also a little bit. Like, is there certain, like whether it's sunlight or some other irritants, or is it internal from our diet? And, because this will kind of segue into, I guess, the nutrients at some point. So what is oxidative stress in the eye, in your opinion?
Yeah, so I like to make the analogy of oxidative stress as like biological rusting. So if you have some kind of metal, it's, fresh new metal, you expose it to the elements, oxygen, water, eventually it starts to rust. And the same thing happens to our bodies. If we get exposed to too many elements that may potentially be harmful and we don't have enough protection, then our body starts to rust. And it's not physical rust, but it's kind of the same concept.
No, that's a good analogy.
And also, so you were asking, where does this come from? Where does the oxidative stress come from? Well, there are both internal sources of oxidative stress and also external. So internally, whenever a tissue has a high metabolic rate, when it processes energy like that, it also creates free radicals in doing that. So it's creating its own kind of oxidative stress. And so we need a lot of antioxidants to kind of counter that, neutralize that internal oxidative stress from energy production. The second thing is that there are a lot of environmental sources of oxidative stress for the eye. You mentioned UV light, which comes from the sun. That's perhaps one of the most dangerous types of oxidative stress. We call that photooxidative stress, but also blue light. It's part of the visible spectrum of light. It's part of the rainbow. We can see blue light, but the blue light, especially when it comes from our devices, is high energy blue light. It can potentially do damage to our ocular tissues. And then also eating foods that are pro-inflammatory, that can cause oxidative stress. Toxins in the environment, especially air pollution with our eyes, can cause a lot of oxidative stress. So there's a lot of different sources, internal and external.
Oh, those are really good points. We're actually going to get into some a little bit deeper too, because you're bringing up some really interesting things. Inflammation in the eye. Now, this also fascinates me too. Again, from my immunology background, one of the really fascinating things I was reading once that HIV. And I'm a little confused about this, but supposedly there are certain areas they're called immune privilege areas. I believe the eye is one of them. I think that the testicles are another, and there might be, I think one of the maybe in the fetus. I don't know. But there's a couple of these areas where apparently like virus can even sometimes maybe get in, but they doesn't cause damage. So when we talk about inflammation in the eye, again, are we talking about it's both internal and external, meaning like if you have diseases like diabetes, we know, or hypertension, do you get inflammation in the eye? Or even honestly, people are very interested like autoimmune disease.
Mhm.
Again, from the if you're wearing your functional medicine hat, a lot of people feel that the inflammation is coming from the gut. But is it the chicken
Mhm.
or the egg thing? Is it just directly the eye is getting that immune attack, or do you feel that there's some kind of connection to the overall microbiome in the gut?
I love your questions, Dr. Mitchell.
I think about them a lot before I ask them.
No, you really you touched on so many important points. So I'm going to back up a little bit to one of the first things you said about immunology and the eye being a privileged site.
Yeah.
So we know the eye, there is something called the blood retinal barrier. So the blood vessels in the retina don't allow too much to kind of get out into the eye because it would cause a lot of inflammation. The eye is really like a closed system, kind of like a
Right.
globe. Like nothing really gets in, really gets out. But the blood vessels do bring blood and nutrients and oxygen. So the blood vessels can be a source of where this whole system breaks down and the immune system breaks down. And so there are diseases like, for example, you mentioned diabetes, which is one of the major ones, where from chronic hyperglycemia, high blood sugar, the high blood glucose damages the capillary lining and it causes those capillaries to become leaky. And so all these blood and fluid and protein and lipid products leak out into the retina and cause inflammation. They normally
Like
shouldn't be
leaky
there.
eye, like we talk about leaky gut all the time. It's leaky eye, right?
That's what I call it. I call
It's
it
an
leaky.
analogous,
I'm
yeah.
probably the only one to say that, but I hope people start to understand this concept. We
That's
heard about
important, right?
gut, leaky skin, leaky heart. There is leaky eye syndrome. Another great example of this is macular degeneration, where this is also something that happens in the retina, where the blood vessels first, there's actually waste deposits that form that don't get cleared. And then those waste deposits cause inflammation. And then the inflammation causes new blood vessels to grow that aren't normal. These blood vessels leak and they cause vision loss. So it's a slightly different path, but it's also a kind of leaky eye syndrome. So, yes, you can get inflammation. And then the autoimmune component. Whenever there's this breakdown of the blood retinal barrier, these inflammatory cells can get in and wreak havoc on the eye structures. There's so many types of autoimmune conditions that first show up in the eye. Lupus, Sjogren's syndrome, rheumatoid
Really? Oh,
arthritis.
interesting. Yeah. I hadn't thought about that. You always think about the skin because you can see it, but I'm sure in a good ophthalmological exam, yeah.
We can
Mhm.
see it for sure. Like they're visible on our exam. So I'm going to put in a little plug here so people know this. But everyone after the age of 40 should go get an annual eye checkup because a lot of these issues initially have no symptoms whatsoever. So it's best to go, just like you see your dentist twice a year, you get your colonoscopies, your mammograms, your annual checkups. Go see your eye doctor, get a dilated eye exam, and then they can look for all of these things that may be brewing, like whether it's autoimmune disease or hypertension or diabetes, simply from an eye exam. So please, please, please put that on your annual health checkup calendar.
I was going to ask you about that, but I'm glad we're jumping to that because we'll come back to some other things that are really important from your book. But yeah, I was going to ask you how often a person should go. And you're basically, I mean, I agree with you. A lot of times, you tend to think about older people going to ophthalmologists, but probably anybody over 40 should be going. You know what I thought was interesting, and I don't think it really is done in a lot of ophthalmology offices. You know, the equipment is so amazing today. You literally obviously could get photographed pictures of the fundus, right? And like, let's say, your ophthalmologist leaves town or you switch doctors, that you have this sort of record because as you probably know best, looking at the progression of what's going on could be so important to intervene at a stage, not like one day you end up, you're 60 years old, you open the ophthalmologist, he's like, oh my God, you're right on the precipice of, macular degeneration or something where if you had like almost, like photos, do they do that in some of the offices or not really?
Yeah, so it is becoming part of kind of the standard of care is to do annual photographs. There are different types of photographs we can do. There's regular fundus photographs. There's something called OCT, which is a high resolution scan of the retina and the optic nerve. So a lot of eye doctors are starting to do that, both ophthalmologists and optometrists. And then one other thing I just want to mention is that Now when you go for a regular health checkup, you have your vital signs, right? You have your blood pressure, your heart rate, your oxygen level. Probably the eye exam will eventually be part of those vital signs. Like there will be non-mydriatic fundus cameras in primary care doctors' offices. Now, these are cameras that can take photos without dilating you. So that's a plus. They don't have to get dilated. So they can do that quick picture, put it into a database, an AI database, and have the AI kind of scan it to look for diseases. So I think it's going to be probably in the next 5 to 10 years, it's going to be part of our routine health checkups is to get these eye fundus photos.
That makes sense. Obviously, when we go to the airports now and everything too, they're doing some kind of scan. I don't know if they're even doing retinal scans, and they've talked before that with identification. I mean, it's really fascinating how there is just so much information, and then maybe AI will be our assistant. I always say it was named wrong. It shouldn't be called artificial intelligence. It should be called assisted intelligence because it's our assistant. If it kind of makes our job a little more focused, which I think is what's going to happen in healthcare. Let me ask you this too, because this is sometimes a little bit of a tricky question. I know we're going to get into the Eye Health Summit in a few minutes too, but what's the difference, and you don't have to be diplomatic, between an ophthalmologist and an optometrist doing an eye exam?
Well, let me explain first from a training basis. So ophthalmologists have gone to medical school. They have MDs and they're fully trained so after medical school, they spend a year of internship and then 3 years of residency. They're fully trained in diagnosing all eye conditions and also prescribing glasses, but also doing surgery. So we do the whole range. Optometrists have gone to college and then they go to optometry school for 4 years. And then they're kind of like the primary eye care doctors in our world, in the US at least. Not in all countries, but in the US. So if you have a basic eye problem, let's say you need glasses or you have a little dry eye, absolutely go see your optometrist. But if you have something more serious going on, and like, for example, glaucoma, macular degeneration, cataracts, go see an ophthalmologist. And a lot of people don't know the difference because we're both ophthalmologists, optometrists are eye doctors, right? That's the general term that's
Well,
used.
it's not even that too. I seen some of these. I had to take a relative to a practice in Florida because they had something in their eye, and everybody's running around in scrubs. even the medical assistants are running around in scrubs. You don't know who the doctor is.
That's
and they
true.
walk in. Oh, come on in. They put your eye drops in your eyes before you know. And the person is like in Florida. It's like a medical assistant. They're not. So it's a little crazy, but and I'm sure they're very well trained, but. I'll never forget the quote once one of my patients said to me. I think it'll make you laugh. One of the patients who picked me as their doctor, I was doing a little bit of internal medicine back years ago and stuff. She goes, a lot of these practices now, because this is when the HMOs were getting popular, they have like physician assistants and nurse practitioners seeing the patients who are very good. She goes, but I really want somebody that has suffered during their training. I raised my hand and go, I suffered,
Yes,
I was up a
we went
lot
through
of
the
nights.
rites of training.
I don't know. I think sometimes it does make us a little bit tougher just to,
Yeah.
So.
I always tell my daughter, it's kind of like going through the military. Like you have
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. I felt like, I trained, I'm older than you. When I got out of medical school and went into residency, it was the height of the AIDS epidemic in the late 80s, early 90s. I felt like I walked onto a war zone. There were 20 AIDS patients on my ward waiting for me. I was just fresh out of medical school and overwhelmed by the infections that they had. They were dying left and right. This was before the triple cocktails. So yeah, it felt at being on call every third or fourth night, it felt like war, So I've never been in the military or shot a gun, but that was my training. Interesting though. I'm glad you pointed that out. Let's back up a little bit too. I'm sure the listeners really want to know about this. And, they talk about a lot, and you mentioned about the brain-eye connection. You hear a lot about superfoods for the brain. Are the same foods the same for the eye? Is there some that maybe in particular people may want to try to remember to eat a little bit more frequently?
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely a lot of overlap in the superfoods that help the brain and the eye because the eye is a direct extension of the brain. But if you have to focus on like one food group that you really need to have in your diet to give you a lot of nutrients, not just one or two nutrients, but a whole spectrum of nutrients, it would be the leafy greens because they are rich in lutein and zeaxanthin. Now, these are you mentioned this earlier. They're this class of carotenoids. They're like cousins to beta carotene or vitamin A, and they're very unique to the eye because our bodies can't make these compounds, these nutrients. So we need to get them from diet or take a supplement, but they get deposited into the back of the eye, into the macula. And they act, this is amazing how our eyes developed and evolved this way, but these nutrients act as shields. So imagine like they're shielding you from light damage, from UV light damage, from blue light damage, from other types of oxidative stress. So they neutralize that biological arresting. And we know that they're so important. I'll just give you one example. For macular degeneration, if you have enough lutein and zeaxanthin in your diet, meaning if you're like in the top 20% of, intakers of these nutrients, people who eat these nutrients, then your risk of AMD or macular degeneration goes down by 43%.
That's huge. That was one of the questions I wanted to ask you. I mean, I assume they did it, but I've never seen it. Have they done like long-term studies where they measured blood levels on patients to these supplements and noticed that they start to diverge?
Yeah. The first studies were done, I believe they were kind of in the early 90s. And then there's the biggest study done on this had 100,000 people. 100,000 people.
That's a lot.
For an average of 26 years. And they found the same exact finding that the risk went down by about 41 to 43% if you have the highest quintile, which means, again, the top 20% intake of lutein and zeaxanthin. So what does that mean? How much do you need to eat? This is going to shock a lot of people, but I tell people if you're relying on spinach, kale, collard greens, shoot for 5 cups a day, at least 3, but maybe even 5 cups a day to get to that highest quintile. Now, if you're eating a diversity of foods, you don't necessarily need to do all 5 cups of only that. You can do other foods like egg yolk is actually rich in lutein and zeaxanthin, that beautiful orange color of egg yolk.
Yeah, the yellow color, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then yellow and orange bell peppers, there's some fruits, some spices. And I talk about some of these foods in my book, but there's a lot. So if you don't like leafy greens, if you're not a big fan of them, let's say you have an oxalate sensitivity or something like that, you could eat a lot of other foods that will supply you with these nutrients and then fill in the gaps with supplementation.
The same way too, also, possibly a little more in my area than yours, I get a lot into medical family history.
Yes.
I always say too, people are always worried about the latest, the newest tests. I say, just check what your parents have. Whenever I get something later on in life, I check with my mom. I'm like her. And she goes, oh yeah, I had to take medicine for that. Oh yeah. It's like, I was like, what do I need? A DNA test? I just got to talk. Thank God if I speak to my mom, I can find that information out. So how important is genetic?
In ophthalmology, we call it a FAT scan, family,
you do? Okay.
Mammography or something like that.
So, I mean, is it important, like, to sometimes ask your patients, like, did your mom or dad get AMD? Did they get glaucoma, cataracts?
Absolutely. We know that AMD in particular, if a parent has AMD, then they probably have some of the genes for AMD, and there's a 50% risk that their child will have AMD. Mm-hmm. Glaucoma, there's a high risk as well, maybe not as high as 50%. Maybe I don't know the number off the top of my head, but I think it's 30%. So if you have not just a parent, but even if you have a grandparent, an aunt, an uncle, cousin, definitely when you get together with your family during holidays or whenever it is you get together, reunions, ask around and make a list of all the things that are running in the family because your doctors need to know this. Absolutely, they need to know this.
Just going back to the foods also, obviously the carotenoids are very important. And also, I'm sure probably the anthocyanins. Am I saying that right?
Anthocyanins, yes.
Cyanins, right. Like the purple, the blueberries, which one's better? Or you can't really say. They're both important.
I would say the darker the berry, the better. So blueberries, blackberries probably will give you your biggest bang for your buck. So anthocyanins are the pigmented compounds in these types of fruits and berries. They are very, very strong antioxidants. Now I'll share something else with you. Something I learned as I was writing the book, doing my research for the book. People who eat half a cup of blueberries a day, just half a cup, have a reduced risk of cognitive decline and dementia.
Wow. That's pretty impressive. Wow.
I think there have been multiple studies that have corroborated that finding. And I think patients were followed out for 2 or 3 years. So not super long-term, but long-term enough that they had some degree of cognitive issue. They were enrolled in the study and they showed that they benefited. So half a cup a day is all you need for the blueberry.
Yeah, delicious. It's much better than spinach. Although spinach
I had a huge bowl of blackberries and strawberries this morning.
Yeah, me too. I like to throw it in like my oatmeal,
Yeah.
Okay. Well, one of the really important question, but I mean, you've been answering it, but I want to hear it directly. One of the interesting things about ophthalmology is that typically treatments are applied directly to the eye. When somebody gets like blepharitis, inflammation of the eyelid, you put drops, or conjunctivitis, you put drops in the eye. If something's even more problematic, as ophthalmologists, you inject the eye or you do lasers in the eye. Do foods really in the nutrients get into the eye? I mean, would it be crazy to have like an eye drop that had like lutein in it better than taking it by chewing a pill?
Yeah, I mean, that hasn't been studied, and I don't know if it would even pass like FDA
Oh,
approval.
you could patent it. I'm giving you a great idea here.
We'll see. We'll see. I've talked to some pharmacies, and they're very reluctant because it has to be, if you're putting something topically, you have to be really careful because if it gets contaminated, you could end up with severe.
That's a good point. That's what that people with contact lenses. I mean, I never could wear them, but you used to always hear people, they slept with them overnight. Now they have an infection, and it's scary.
No, for sure. Yeah. And this is a topic we talk about on the summit, contact lens safety. But going back to your question about these nutrients, so we know that lutein and zeaxanthin, if you have them through diet, they do get picked up by the blood. They get deposited into the retina. There are correlations. We can measure their concentration in the retina. The anthocyanidins, unfortunately, they're not so great in terms of their bioavailability if you take them via, like, let's say, a supplement, but we know that when you have them as foods, that probably it gets absorbed better. So I always tell my patients, especially if you're having antioxidants, try to enhance their bioavailability, and most of them are lipid soluble. So have them with some kind of fat, some kind of, it's like berries and nuts to help get them absorbed. That would be, or if you're having like leafy greens, maybe, toss it in some olive oil or cook it with some oil to get it absorbed better.
One of the things too that I've always, I take a bunch of vitamins and supplements, very specific, and I tell patients I don't believe in taking 50 supplements. I take about 8 or 9 that I think are very important for me. But one of the ones I've always avoided, because you got to always be careful, is vitamin A, because as you probably know, you can become toxic from that. And I know that beta carotene is supposed to be sort of, I guess, the analogous supplement to help for that. Is that what people should probably do? Is that safer in general?
In general, it's safe. You don't want to take super high amounts because, as you said, it can cause toxicity, complications.
Even beta carotene also?
Yeah. So I'm gonna add a little bit of a twist here. So there's an enzyme that converts beta carotene into vitamin A. And the enzyme is called beta carotene monooxygenase, or BCMO. And so depending on your genetic variability in this enzyme, you may be a good converter or not such a good converter. If you don't really convert that well, then have the vitamin A directly. But if you do convert well, then yes, you can have beta carotene. I would say you don't want to have super high amounts. Like if your skin starts to turn orange or yellow, you got to back off a little bit.
That happened to me once. I was in my vegetarian phase, which was a huge mistake many years ago. My palms were turning orange, my face, and it definitely didn't work for me. It's funny,
when my daughter was a baby, her favorite food was sweet potato. So she would have sweet potato every day, and she was literally orange. Her face was, I said, "Oh, okay,
pumpkin syndrome.
We need to back off here." But overall, it's pretty safe. I want to just add one more thing. There is some research to show, and this is unrelated to ophthalmology, but there is research to show that people who have too much beta carotene and vitamin A, especially if they smoke, may have a higher risk of lung cancer.
Yeah, I remember reading that. That seems so crazy. They don't understand why, but they just did find that in a long-term study, right?
Yeah, they don't know why exactly, but because of that, there are certain formulations on the market for supplements called the AREDS formulations. So that formulation was adjusted because of this potential increased risk of lung cancer in people who smoke.
Well, grandma's advice was always right. Everything in moderation. We don't always have the magic ball, even in medicine. So true. Before we get onto the Eye Health Summit, I just want to ask you one more question about really kind of hardcore ophthalmology too. It's interesting. I see with relatives and everything, it seems like almost everybody I know in their 70s or 80s needs cataract surgery. Mm-hmm. Is this inevitable for all of us, or is there really something people can do to prevent what I guess people call the windshield wipers of our eye, from getting cloudy and not being able to see?
Yeah. So I tell people if you're lucky to live long enough, there are three things that are going to happen to your eyes. Number one, in your mid 40s, early 50s, you're going to develop something called presbyopia, which is
Yep,
trouble
got that
reading.
one.
You have to like hold things further away.
Yep, yep. I fought that, but it was a losing battle.
Everyone gets it, myself included. And there are different ways to manage it. And we have a whole session on this in the summit. Number two, cataracts. Now, what cataracts are is we have a lens inside our eye that helps us to focus. And the lens are kind of like it's kind of like our internal glasses. And when we're young, it's clear, it's transparent, it's like a clean window. But as we get older, the lens begins to oxidize. We talked about biological rusting. So it becomes more opaque and yellow. And over the years, gradually it becomes more and more yellow until the point when people can't see well anymore and then they have to have surgery. So yes, it happens to everyone, but just because you have a cataract doesn't mean you have to go rush into any kind of surgery or anything like that. Most of my patients who actually ultimately need cataract surgery, they can delay it by quite a bit using diet, nutrition, et cetera. But they're later in life, like basically like mid to late 70s, early 80s is when most of my patients end up having to need surgery. So you may start to develop a cataract when you're in your mid 50s or early 60s, but you can probably put it off by 15, 20 years before you have to have anything done about it. And the third thing I mentioned that everybody gets, can you guess what it may be, Dr. Mitchell?
What do you think?
What does everybody
So everybody gets
with their eyes? Everybody gets this.
presbyopia. I don't know.
Okay. Fine lines and wrinkles.
Wait, let's go back to college. Do I get a multiple choice?
Fine lines and wrinkles. So everybody,
Oh yeah,
you're going to
guys
get
don't
those
worry about
fine
that as
lines
much.
and wrinkles under your eyes. It's going to happen. It's just a fact of aging. So yes, don't worry about
I guess we have to all deal with it. Nobody, don't go gently into the night, as we learned in literature. Okay, let's get on to the Eye Health Summit, which is starting May 1st, which is this Thursday. This hopefully podcast is going to be released a day before that. So again, I'm really encouraging anybody that's interested in getting the latest information on their eyesight, and it's going to go from May 1st to May 8th. So what motivated you to organize this? This is a big project for somebody who's got a busy life already, seeing patients, doing research, writing books. What made you want to do this?
I've been thinking about doing this for like 6 or 7 years, but I kept putting it off because it wasn't the right time. But finally I said, you know what? I need to get this information out to the world. So what I gave you today was like, just a little sneak peek into some of the
snippets that are just enough to get us really interested.
And basically what I've done is brought together 36 experts. And each is talking about their unique insights and expertise about how you can keep your eyes healthy. So we cover topics from dry eye to kids' eye health to blue light and eye strain to, again, the cosmetic changes like dark circles and sagging eyes and droopy lids, macular degeneration, diabetes, every topic most people would probably want to hear about, we cover glaucoma. So all the experts are sharing their knowledge. Each interview is about 30, 35 minutes. And each day, if you look at our website, theeyehealthsummit.com, there is a day's agenda. So you can see what the theme of the day is and who's speaking. So
it's really, really
so you can kind of pick and choose like which ones, if you want to listen to all of them.
It's not just a nice list for hours and hours. But I wanted to ask you too, because it's online now, I guess it's live streamed, but if someone purchases the ticket for the Eye Health Summit, can they watch it later on?
Yeah, so the summit is free.
Wow.
Well, you can catch all those talks. They're available. Each day is available for 24 hours. Then it expires, and then the next day's talks get released. So every day it's kind of like a rolling type of.
So you can't go back. Let's say you missed one that you really wanted to see. You can't. It's gone.
It's not free anymore. Then you would have to purchase the package.
Okay. Well, I mean, it still could be worthwhile for people. Okay.
Yeah, you could purchase we call it the Visionary VIP package. And it's got a lot of bonuses. So every day of the summit, I do a masterclass. Every morning, I do like a 1-hour masterclass about a particular topic. You can learn a lot and then learn from the speakers. And then at the end of the day, we do live Q&A. So if you have like a burning question you really want to get answered, join us because it's going to be me with panelists, about 4 or 5 panelists every day. And we'll be taking questions from the audience. So that'll be via Zoom. By the way, it's all online. Everything's online, nothing in person. You can join from everywhere. And actually, we've been promoting the summit. We have people joining from all around the world. We have 6 continents represented in our audience. And we have, I think we have close to like 20,000 people now already registered. And that's probably going to go up to like at least 35,000 by the time Thursday hits. So hopefully I encourage people to join. It's free. Why not? Join.
No, I mean, yeah, information is great. Getting it in depth. Again, I know that people that have been following my podcast the last 5 years, and I see a lot of the patients, they end up, I see a lot of the listeners, they come in as patients to see me. And I think they really appreciate, as I do when I listen to other podcasts, to really get that higher level, in-depth experience. Anybody can go to Dr. Google, now ChatGPT, and the information is good. And I love when my patients are educated and informed, but it's awfully nice to have somebody that has a lot of experience that can share and hopefully direct you on the right path. I was just curious too.
And I want to just add one more thing, related to what you, Dr. Mitchell, is when you go to your eye doctor, when you do go for your annual checkup, you get maybe, if you're lucky, most of your time is spent with the tech, but maybe you'll get 5 to 10 minutes with the doctor face to face.
Right.
Only so much time to share this information your doctor has. 5 minutes, 10 minutes is not enough to talk about diet and lifestyle and supplements 100%. And what else you can do and what's your prognosis. So the summit is really meant to be a resource to fill in those gaps and help people understand eyes better.
Yeah, that's a great point. Have you had any backlash, from any of your colleagues about being interested in functional medicine? I know back in the day I was, people kind of looked at your skill. It's changing, but I'm just curious because you're kind of like one of the pioneers as far as in ophthalmology embracing this. Does any of your colleagues say, oh, come on, get back to the real stuff, like, taking out people's cataracts?
Yeah. So I'll share this one story with you. For when I first got my functional medicine training, I had some business cards made. And I do a lot of migraine in my practice. I'm a migraine patient, but I also take care of a lot of patients with migraine, being a neuro-ophthalmologist. So on my card, I had a couple of things like neuro-ophthalmology, comprehensive ophthalmology, and holistic migraine wellness. And so my retina colleague saw my card and he's like, what is this like voodoo medicine? Like, what is it that you're doing, this holistic stuff? And I said, it's not voodoo. This is published, some of these have studies, many of the interventions actually have studies behind them. It's not voodoo medicine. So that was, again, maybe like 8 years ago. And I think people are coming around. I can say like not a single one of my colleagues since then has ever said anything skeptical or critical. They want to learn more.
No, that's good. It's a different environment now, for sure. I just wasn't sure because, ophthalmology is still one of the very conventional classic.
It is. It's very surgical, and people
areas,
are like,
right? Very surgical. I mean, I interviewed a few weeks ago. I forgot his name. He was really terrific. He wrote a book on his experience as a resident in ophthalmology, and what he really pointed out, which was amazing in his book, because he was a big historian. He went to Yale, and he was a history major.
Oh, is it Ravi Goel? Is that who you?
Yes, yeah.
He's actually on the summit. He's a friend of mine.
Oh, is he? He was great. And like what we discussed what he did discuss in the book, which was fascinating. I mean, people take it for granted now. Some of the major advances in ophthalmology. I mean, again, it's such a small space, and even cataract surgeries and all that were not, benign. I mean. And, with the advances that have gone on there, it's a little bit like dentistry. It's amazing for people. I mean, and so that in itself.
Keeps getting better. Like our technologies are just every year they're getting better. The more options for patients, it's wonderful. It's a very exciting field. But I really made it my mission to make preventative eye health a priority. Like most ophthalmologists don't know about it. They're not trained in it, but I would like to share my information, my knowledge with them. That's also a reason for doing the summit. We have about 50% of our participants being eye care providers, which is pretty incredible.
Wow.
Of those thousands, eye care providers want to learn about this so then they can share it with their patients. So
this is the whole thing with providing more value to your patients, for sure.
Yeah. So hopefully this will have a multiplication effect, having the summit, having doctors learn so then they can then teach their patients and show them ways that they can protect their eyes.
Last question before we finish up too. Do eye exercises work? Or they just, because we all look at screens a lot. And I remember once actually, I had this osteopath who was a very bright guy. He's from Europe. And he had shown me a whole bunch of very interesting eye exercises to do. Now, he said it was going to help my vision. I don't know if it really helped my vision, but I will say that I think it helped, how do I put it, maybe my peripheral vision, or, I've heard that, sometimes even pilots and stuff they do, they train them to look at distances and things like that. And of course, I have a lot of patients, as I'm sure you do, they're very athletic. And, in sports, your eye-hand coordination is very important. Can that be improved?
That's a great question. And it is a controversial topic, first of all. I'll just put it out there. But as somebody who really believes in holistic care and also mindset, which is really important, some of these eye exercises, they have been shown to help, but also in aside from just helping with vision, I shouldn't say just helping with vision, but just helping with one's vision, they help you relax. And when you're more
Interesting. That's true.
relaxed, when you're more in a parasympathetic versus a sympathetic state, your vision is better. The quality of your vision is better. Your visual experience is better. So there are certain exercises that I'm going to be teaching during the summit. This is on day 8, so the last day of the summit. It is part of the VIP package. So if you wanted to learn how some of the exercises that I do myself, I share, please join us. But there are lots of exercises you can do. I mean, you can go on YouTube and Google like eye yoga, for example, eye palming. I found those very effective. Like they can really help to relax you. Again, whether it's going to help you get from 2040 to 2020 on the chart, I don't think that's going to do that, but it will
you just
probably
give me an
help.
idea though, again, also I see a lot in my practice. This is interesting, because when I'm examining a patient and I'm looking in their mouth, something very basic we all do in medicine, I'm looking at a couple of interesting things. I'm looking at the patient's tongue because a lot of times I'm looking to see if there's some candida, yeast overgrowth. Obviously, I'm looking a little bit at the dentition. But the other thing again, I learned this from my own problem was that I noticed so many patients have, really tight jaws, like TMJ, and that can induce migraines. And also, as you know, too, probably with the eyes. I mean, if you're not sleeping well, if you're very stressed, your eye, the lids are, super tight. So I would think that exercising, massaging gently, certain things like that could be helpful to something that could be debilitating, as you mentioned, occurred to yourself.
Yeah, yeah. And, you mentioned migraine, which is, again, one of my favorite topics, but light sensitivity can trigger migraine. And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
this is really interesting. And I'll be sharing this also during that masterclass on day 8. There are certain acupressure points. If somebody has pain around their eye socket or migraine, there are acupressure points that you can do self acupressure to relieve the tension along those nerves. Actually, it's the
Great.
trigeminal nerve that goes to your jaw. Is one branch that goes to your jaw, another branch that goes to your cheek, and another branch that goes to your
Yeah,
eye and your eye
trigeminal. Yeah,
socket. There's ways to calm down that nerve when it gets irritated. There's a lot of things that people can
makes
do, like
sense.
self DIY type things that people can do.
One last question. Blue light glasses, good idea for people that are looking at screens, and especially at night so that it doesn't disturb their sleep.
For screens, they don't work.
No, I mean, on your glasses, if your glasses have those blue light glasses, no,
They
they don't
don't work.
work.
There's no evidence, and this is like shocking
Wow.
for many people. There is no scientific proof that blue light blocking glasses actually help with eye strain. Zero.
Oh,
But
that's
they may help with
disappointing.
sleep. I don't know if there's any studies on sleep. They may help with sleep, but it's the nutrients that help. So the nutrients have science behind them. The blue blocking glasses don't. So have lots of lutein and
Oh,
zeaxanthin
wow.
instead of spending your money on blue blockers because
All right, spend them on your vitamins. That's
yeah,
important. That's great advice.
don't give in. Yes, just say no, thank you.
Okay. All right. So one last time for my listeners, if you've enjoyed this podcast, and I'm sure you have, I want you to learn even more about your eye health. Please sign up for the Eye Health Summit, which starts on May 1st. And Dr. Banik, is there anything else you want to mention that we just didn't get a chance to talk about, even though I think we covered a lot?
I mean, I'll just reiterate, our eyes, they're so complex, they're so precious. We need to be careful with them. We need to be proactive. And that's what you're going to learn during the summit, like everything you should be doing to keep your eyes healthy. Because what would we do with without our vision? I mean, our vision is so precious.
It's
People take it for
frightening. I think
granted.
that, we worry about a lot of things in our health, and I think we take our eyes for granted if you're fortunate enough to be able to see. But yeah, when I've had a friend who was a physician colleague who had retinitis pigmentosa. And for our listeners, as I know you're well aware, it's an eye disease that's progressive, and the patients, it's like looking through more and more like
They
a
get like a
pinhole,
tunnel vision.
right?
Yeah.
Till eventually they can't, they can barely see just shades. And my friend, this colleague, was an amazing person. He still traveled and lectured. He was just like a phenomenal person. But I was just such in awe of him. And I think every time I used to leave, because he used to do some osteopathic manipulation on me, and he was fantastic. But because his hands got even more sensitive and amazing after he lost his eyesight. But I
Other
used to walk,
senses probably took over.
maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, he would hear things too. Like he could tell if you were walking in the door, he knew which patient it was. Just amazing how your brain starts to rewire. But I used to leave a lot of times. And sometimes I even forgot he was blind. I tell you, it was just so crazy how he worked. And he memorized everything in the exam room, so he moved effortlessly. But I would walk out and say, oh my God, what a blessing to be able to see all the amazing things that unfortunately
It is so
he can't.
true. Yes, we're so fortunate, those of us who have good vision, to be able to see and read and see faces. So yeah, let's make this a revolution and protect our vision.
Yeah. Dr. Rudrani Banik, thank you so much for taking the time to share your wealth of information, and good luck with the summit.
Thank you so much, Dr.